You are tuned to the Witching Hours, and I'm your host, Kanaska Carter. Tonight's episode will be about reincarnation. I'm going to be going into 3 separate cases and talking about the different things that happened and how it could potentially lead us to believe that this is a case of reincarnation in all 3 cases. So the first case is James Leinegard. And so in World War II, a pilot was killed. The parents were a Christian couple from Indiana. Okay, so this is who James Leinegard's parents were. They were not into reincarnation. They didn't believe in it at all. And James started to exhibit certain behaviors at a very early age, as early as 22 months old. So he took a trip at the age of 22 months to a flight museum, and he became obsessed with World War II. So 2 months later, so during the day, he would say, airplane crash on fire, and then he would take his toy airplane and crash it into the coffee table over and over. He would slam the toy airplane into the coffee table. So it's believed that this could be related to post-traumatic play. So this happens to people. They tend to reenact the previous career of the deceased. So children who have been believed to be reincarnated, they will act out the career of the person who has been deceased. So the plane crashed on fire and was shot down by the Japanese, and he flew a Corsair. These were the 3 things that he would always talk about. He would say, my plane crashed on fire, shot down by the Japanese, and he flew a Corsair, which was a type of airplane. So no Corsair was at the museum when they visited. When he was 22 months old. There was no Corsair there. He also said that he flew off a boat, and the name of the boat is NATOMA. So the USS NATOMA Bay was actually stationed in the Pacific in World War II. So it's interesting because he would go on with all these details. The parents asked who else was there, and he actually gave a name, Jack Larson. When he was 2.5, they bought a book on JIMA. And they came to a page of Iwo Jima, and it showed an image of what it looked like. And James, the child, pointed at it and said, that's where my plane was shot down. So the NATOMA Bay took part in Iwo Jima operation. So when he became 3 years old, he drew images of airplanes in battle scenes. He said that when he would sign it, it was James with a 3 at the end. So he would say that he was the 3rd James, which didn't really make sense. They thought maybe it was because he was 3 years old, but he said, no, I'm the 3rd James. So we're going to get into exactly why I think that is related, because so he signed his drawings James 3. Now they ended up finding a pilot who had he died at Iwo Jima. He was the only pilot that died at Iwo Jima, and his name was James Houston Jr. So if he was a junior, that would make the reincarnation of him the 3rd James. So James Leinegard, the kid, he said he flew off the NATOMA. And James Houston was a pilot on the USS NATOMA Bay. James Leinegard said he flew a Corsair, which was a type of plane. And James Houston, he was involved in testing out, and he had flown a Corsair. So he also said that he was shot down by the Japanese, and he died at Iwo Jima. James Houston was shot down by the Japanese, and he was the one NATOMA Bay pilot killed in the Iwo Jima operation. It's just crazy. He also said my airplane got shot in the engine and crashed into the water, and that's how I died. James Houston, eyewitnesses reported Houston's plane was hit head-on right on the middle of the engine, which is exactly where James Leinegard said his plane was shot in a previous life. So we would have nightmares of a plane crashing and sinking in the water. So James ended up going on to become an Eagle Scout, and he ended up joining the Navy. He also talked about his sisters, Annie and Ruth. So it's a very interesting case. There's just too many parallels. Okay, so we're going to get into the story of the Pollock sisters. So they were twins in the next life. John and Florence Pollock were the parents, and in 1957 they had 2 daughters that died in an accident. Joanna was 11, Jacqueline was 6, and they were walking to church with their friend when they were struck by a car. It was a suicide gone wrong. The person that was driving the car apparently took a bunch of pills. They were trying to kill themselves, and they ended up causing an unintentional homicide to 3 children. So the family soon gave birth to twins who were allegedly the spitting image of the daughters, and they called them Jennifer and Gillian. Now, the twins found dolls of the previous daughters that had lived, Joanna and Jacqueline. So they knew the names of the dolls, they knew the names of the stuffed animals, and at the age of 3, Jacqueline fell into a bucket and hurt herself, and she had a scar on her forehead. She also had a scar on the left side of the waist. Jennifer had the same 2 she had birthmarks in the same 2 places when she was born. So they believe Jennifer was the reincarnation of Jacqueline, who died in the previous life. She would also often say, "I will never be a lady." So their classmate was the other person that died on the way to church that day. The day of their death, John had a vision of them in heaven and claimed to sense the girl's spirit in the upstairs room of the house. This is where he spent a lot of time after the death to feel close to the girls, and he believed in reincarnation. The mother did not believe in reincarnation at all. 1 year later, Florence was pregnant with twins. The obstetrician said there was a single fetus, but she ended up giving birth to twin girls on October 4th, 1958. Gillian and Jennifer. So, like I had mentioned, Jennifer had the same birthmarks, the white line on the forehead and on the left side. The girls also behaved like the deceased sisters. Gillian would mother Jennifer, just like the older sister, Joanna, had mothered Jacqueline in the previous life. Gillian was generous, outgoing, liked wearing costumes and acting like Joanna did in the previous life, and seemed more mature, like she was the older sister, even though they were the identical twins at the same age. So Gillian took Joanna's doll. Jennifer claimed Jacqueline's doll. They knew the names. They also claimed that the dolls were Christmas presents from Santa Claus, which they were in the previous life for the deceased sisters. They knew the names of the dolls, and the Pollocks left Hexham and moved to Bexley Bay when the twins were only 9 months old. 3 years later, they decided to revisit Hexham. And while they were walking to the park, the twins said that they wanted to go to the swings and proceeded to show the way there, even though they had never been there in this life anyway. And they also recognized their previous school. They were both terrified of cars, and a vehicle started near them in an alleyway. The girls clung to each other and were yelling, the car, it's coming for us." Florence overheard them discussing also the accident in the previous life, in which their elder sisters died. The details the twins were not supposed to know. Florence used to wear a smock. The mother, Florence, used to wear a smock while helping her husband with milk delivery. And after the daughter's death, she quit doing that and never wore the garment again. When the twins were 4, John put the smock on while he was painting, and Jennifer asked why he was wearing Mommy's coat. She became annoyed when Gillian didn't recognize it, and they believe that's because Joanna in the previous life, who was the older deceased sister, was at school while they were delivering milk, and they had worked on delivery. So she never saw the outfit in her previous life. That's why she didn't recognize it in this one, is the theory, right? So When asked how she knew the coat belonged to her mother, Jennifer said her mother used to wear it while delivering milk. When they turned 5, they lost all memories, absolutely all memories of their past lives. They lost it. Gillian and Jennifer were monozygotic twins, genetically identical. So the birthmarks could not be explained by genetics, allegedly. Another interesting story. But it's not even a story, it's just based on reality, and how that seems like reincarnation to me. How would they know the names of the dolls? Why would they have the same kind of birthmarks associated with the scar and the birthmark of the previous child? Makes no sense. So the third story for tonight, third reincarnation case, is Purnima Ekanajake. So she's the daughter of teachers in Bakamura in northern Sri Lanka. So at the age of 3, she began speaking about a past life where she was a manufacturer of incense. She had been run over by a big vehicle and killed. This is what she remembered from the past life. So she was killed as she was bringing incense to market on a bicycle. She and her family made incense. They had no other job, and they were making Ambiga and Geta Picha incense. She specifically knew the names of the types of incense. So the incense factory, she claimed, was near a brick factory and a pond, and they had 2 vans and a car. At the beginning of the business, only the family was involved in making the incense, but she claimed that later they hired 2 more people and employed them for the business. So she said that in a past life, she was a man married to Kusumi and later had another wife. Her mother's name was Simona, and she had 2 younger brothers. She also spoke about how her previous father was not a teacher like her present father, and he had been a bad man who thought there was no need for school and that he should only be making money by making incense. So she studied only up till the 5th grade, attending the Rahula School, a 2-story building, unlike the one school in Bakamuna. So in the previous life, he was in a 2-story building. One evening, while watching a television documentary about Kelaniya, Purnima said, "I live there on the other side of the river." Now, how would she know that? So around this time, a new teacher started to find interest in the case. Sumanasiri came to teach in the school where her father was the principal in the next life. He became interested in the case, and he went to investigate with another man to the other side of the river because he lived in that area where she had lived in the previous life. He lived in Kelaniya, and he inquired about incense makers and soon was able to actually track down the family from her previous life. Jinadasa Pereira was the man who died, and his family produced Ambiga and Gita Picha incense exactly as Purnima had described. Jinadasa was run over by a bus on his way to market on a bicycle to bring incense. One wheel of the bus went over his chest, and he died instantly in 1985, 2 years before Purnima's birth. Purnima soon visited her old family unannounced, began knowing people's exact names in relation to her previous life. She was able to lead them there and walk there, and she knew exactly where it was. So she described details about their incense business, changes made to the packet covers. She recalled an accident where her brother-in-law had damaged his knee. And the autopsy of Jinadasa showed the bus drove diagonally over his chest, breaking ribs on the left side, puncturing the lungs. Purnima had a cluster of birthmarks on the left side of her ribs in the exact injury location. And if you watch the videos of the reincarnation case, you can see this lighter birthmark area on her skin. When Purnima visited, she said, "This is Wijasiri. He is coming. He is my brother-in-law." She knew his name. She knew that this was her brother-in-law. She also whispered in her mother's ear, "This incense dealer, who she was in a past life, had 2 wives. This is a secret. don't give them my address. They might trouble me. So even in the next life, she was worried about how badly she had treated these women in a past life by having 2 women on the go at the same time. So, these are not the only cases of reincarnation that have happened throughout the world. There's thousands of cases. It's usually very young children that recall the type of way that they died, the name of who they were in a previous life, details they couldn't possibly know. So what's the explanation for this? We live on after this life. Perhaps we do. It would really appear that way, that we don't just die and that's it to our existence. It feels like we do continue to be reborn and reborn until perhaps one day we reach enlightenment and we learn all that we need to learn. And there's just so many cases of people where they will have birthmarks or deformities in their next life that are identical to the ways that they died or identical to the birthmarks that they had in a... I remember reading about a case where this woman was born and she was still in love with her husband from a past life. She never remarried and she was obsessed with him. She even looked exactly like the woman. I will be talking about that on an upcoming episode. But if anything, it just reconfirms that there is life after death, and perhaps we just continue to be reborn and reborn. Perhaps these are possessions as well. There is the theory that reincarnation cases is just a spirit possessing the body of the new child. However, the reason why I don't think this is so is because of the birthmarks. I think that this is a case of reincarnation, and it's not just a ghost possessing or a spirit possessing the body. So it's comforting to me to know that reincarnation is real. In my mind anyway, I do believe in it, as do many other people in different spiritual paths and religions. So in the end, only you can decide for yourself what you think is real and what makes sense to you. But it's fun to think about these type of mysteries of our existence and what happens after death. I've had a few near-death experiences. So I guess only time will tell what actually happens to us. We'll have to wait until it is our time to go. In the meantime, let's just enjoy our life to the fullest and have as much fun as we can. Do things that make you happy and live a full life. So I'll see you guys next Wednesday for another episode of The Witching Hours. If you've ever had an experience or you know somebody that perhaps you remember a past life, or you know somebody who remembers their past life, shoot me a message, let me know in the comments. I'll see you next Wednesday for another episode of The Witching Hours. I'm your host, Kanaska Carter.